On May 8, 1999, the world froze when news spread that the icon from the sitcom Diff'rent Strokes had taken her own life in an accidental overdose and had passed away at the young age of 34. As tragic as this was, however, it really doesn't compare to all the struggle, strife, and hardships that Plato had to bear in her life. But the final days leading to her demise were some of the worst in her entire life. Before we go into that, though, here's a breakdown of the great Dana Plato for those who aren't very familiar yet. The icon. Dana Plato's life had a pretty complicated start right from the beginning. She was born Dana Michelle Strain on November 7, 1964 in Maywood, California. Her mother, Linda Strain, was just a teenager at the time, already juggling the responsibilities of caring for another child who was barely out of infancy. It wasn't long before Dana was adopted in June 1965 by a couple, Dean and Florine K. Plato, who lived in the San Fernando Valley. Her adoptive father owned a trucking company, so by all accounts she was given a stable, middle-class upbringing. But by the time she was 3, her adoptive parents divorced, and Dana went to live with her mom. That's when things started to get more complicated. From a young age, Dana was thrown into the world of Hollywood. I mean, she was just a kid when her mom started taking her to auditions. By the time she was 7, she had already starred in over 100 TV commercials. That's wild for someone so young, but it shows how early she was exposed to the pressures of showbiz. And she wasn't just acting, she was an accomplished figure skater too. It seemed like she was on the fast track to fame. But behind the scenes, it wasn't as perfect as it looked. Things got rough when she landed her big break on Diff'rent Strokes. You know, she played Kimberly Drummond, the rich girl in the mansion, but during those years, Dana was already battling some serious personal demons. By the time she was 14, she was drinking alcohol, smoking weed, and even using cocaine. She actually overdosed on diazepam, yeah, a tranquilizer, when she was just 14. That's just heartbreaking to imagine. A kid going through something like that so young. But it gets worse. Later on, in 1995, she appeared on The Marilyn Kagan Show with her Diff'rent Strokes co-star Todd Bridges, and she talked about her childhood. She said something that really stuck with people. Dana said, "My mother made sure that I was normal. The only thing that she did, the mistake she made, was that she kept me in a plastic bubble. So I didn't learn about reality and life skills. It's like she grew up surrounded by fame and success, but completely sheltered from the real world." Kagan even suggested that Dana's mom may have been using her as a meal ticket. You know, to make sure Dana's career kept the money coming in. But Dana didn't think that was true. She insisted that her mom's intentions were good, that she was just trying to protect her from becoming a spoiled Hollywood brat. Still, it makes you wonder if that bubble her mom put her in made it even harder for Dana to deal with all the struggles she faced later in life. Fame came at her fast, but no one ever really taught her how to handle it, or how to handle the dark side that came with it. And unfortunately, those childhood challenges followed her into adulthood in ways that no one could have predicted. It's one of those stories where you can't help but feel a mix of sadness and frustration, knowing that maybe, just maybe, things could have turned out differently if she'd had more support or a chance to live a more grounded life. But like so many other child stars, the pressure and isolation of fame just took their toll. But then, up till her final moments, all of these were just the beginning of her ordeal. In her final days, things took a turn for the worst. Her awful financial ruin. At the height of her fame on Diff'rent Strokes, Dana was earning significant money, around $100,000 per episode at one point. However, due to bad financial management, reckless spending, and a series of personal setbacks, she ended up losing nearly everything. After leaving the show, Dana found herself completely broke. She even had to sell off her prized possessions, including the rights to her Diff'rent Strokes residuals, to get by. At one point, she was so desperate that she worked at a dry cleaning business and tragically even resorted to robbing a video store in Las Vegas in 1991. It's a chilling reminder of how far she had fallen from her early success. What makes it even sadder is that she was immediately recognized during the robbery. People still knew her as the famous actress from TV. She was arrested, but later released on probation. It was a rock-bottom moment that painted a picture of how her once glamorous life had spiraled completely out of control. Dana's fatal cocktail. On that fateful day when Dana passed, she took a combination of muscle relaxants and pain medication. When mixed together, these types of drugs can be extremely risky. They slow down the body's systems, making it difficult to function normally, and in high amounts, they can cause serious harm. But wait, that's not even the sad part. What's really sad is that this specific mix is known to only be used by people who are trying to escape some sort of pain. Whether it's physical discomfort or emotional distress, these medications offer a way to numb it all. For someone like Dana, who had been through so much, it's easy to see why she might have turned to them. But here's where it gets really interesting. In Dana's last interview with Howard Stern, what Dana said was shocking. In the interview, she said, "I have been sober for the longest time. Oh, it's over a decade now, no joke." This interview ended up being her last before her passing. So how come she decided to end her own life by overdosing if she had been sober for a while? More speculations began to arise that perhaps her passing wasn't her own doing, but bigger powers at play. Regardless, during that same interview, things took a sharp turn when callers started dialing in, accusing her of hiding an ongoing issue. One particularly cruel caller called her an ex-addict ex-con and someone with mental health problems. However, Plato, refusing to back down, stood her ground and even offered to take a drug test on the spot several times. Stern, trying to meet her halfway, pulled out a strand of her hair intending to send it for testing, but he ultimately didn't go through with it after his team realized a drugstore test wouldn't give immediate results. She expressed her frustration, saying, "I'm tired of defending my character. I am what I am. What you see is what you get." Despite the harsh criticism she faced, Plato claimed that she was in a good place. In her words, "My life is so good now. I've never been happier." So the question remains, was Dana being truthful about being sober, or was there more to this story, especially seeing how she passed? She had no support. In Dana Plato's later years, her relationships with friends and family became tense for a lot of reasons. However, many of these reasons were tied to the struggles she faced in her personal life. You see, as Dana's career declined after Diff'rent Strokes, Plato found herself battling addiction, financial problems, and legal troubles. These issues took a toll not only on her, but also on those around her. But to be fair, everyone did not give up on her at first. Her friends, loved ones, and even family members tried to help. But over time, it didn't go as planned, and Dana seemed to keep regressing to her old way, wearing her bond out with those who loved her. According to the reports, she often faced accusations of lying or failing to follow through on her promises to get better. So naturally, as she fell deeper into her personal battles, it became harder for her loved ones to stay involved, especially when she wasn't always in a position to accept their help. In the end, she tragically passed away in her fiancé's mother's home, living in a motorhome parked outside the house. What makes this particularly heartbreaking is that, despite having a son and family, none of them were with her during her last hours. She wasn't surrounded by her own family, but rather in a situation where she had no real connection to the place she was staying. At the time, she was living a transient lifestyle, moving from place to place with her fiancé, and struggling to regain her footing in life. The fact that she was relying on her fiancé's family for a place to stay only highlights how disconnected she had become from her own roots. Her son, Tyler, whom she deeply cared about, wasn't with her, and she hadn't seen him regularly for a long time due to custody struggles. There had been so much distance, not just physically but emotionally, between her and her family. Her final pleas fell on deaf ears. So it's not news that in her final days Dana was miserable, but what you may not know is that she realized it herself and she hated it. As a matter of fact, Dana Plato made multiple public pleas to rebuild her life, particularly focused on getting her career back on track and regaining custody of her son Tyler. These statements were heartbreaking because, while she spoke about her goals and plans, It was clear that underneath, she was deeply vulnerable and struggling. Plato often talked about wanting to return to acting, to revive the career that had once made her a household name. But the reality was the opportunities just weren't there anymore. The entertainment industry had moved on, and her attempts to find work were largely unsuccessful. She expressed a strong desire to prove that she had overcome her past, especially her battles with addiction, and that she was ready for a fresh start. However, the constant public scrutiny and the weight of her past made it difficult for people to believe in her transformation. More than anything, she wanted to regain custody of her son. Tyler meant the world to her, and losing him in the custody battle had been one of the most painful blows she endured. In interviews, she would talk about wanting to be a good mother and rebuild their relationship. But these statements often felt like cries for help, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as anyone else that things could still turn around. Dana was trying to hold on to something, to reclaim a part of herself that had been lost over the years. But to many who watched from the outside, these pleas seemed like signs of someone who was desperately grasping for a lifeline, trying to find a way out of the darkness she was trapped in. In the end, her hopes for a comeback and a reunion with her son were left unfulfilled. What appeared to be determined efforts to change her life were, in reality, reflections of how lost and alone she truly felt. Now, this leads us to the next disturbing fact: accident or intentional controversy. On one hand, rumors were all over the place that Plato may have taken her own life because of how awful her life was going. Her life had been a roller coaster ride since her time as the teen star of Diff'rent Strokes. After leaving the show, she faced a rapid decline in her career, which was followed by legal troubles, including a highly publicized arrest for armed robbery. Plato also battled addiction for years, a problem that was well documented by the press and led to a downward spiral in her life. By 1999, she was living in a motorhome parked outside her fiancé's mother's house, far from the Hollywood glamour she had once known. Given the magnitude of these struggles, some believe her final dose was a final deliberate act to escape the overwhelming pressures she could no longer handle. On top of all that, there is also Plato's final appearance on The Howard Stern Show just one day before her demise. On the show, she was confronted by harsh accusations from callers who claimed she was still using drugs, despite her insistence that she had been sober for over a decade. Plato sounded defensive and frustrated, repeatedly offering to take a drug test to prove her sobriety. For some, the emotional weight of this interview, combined with her fragile state, suggests that her demise was an impulsive reaction to the constant criticism and struggles she faced. Her statements about being tired of defending herself may have reflected a deeper sense of hopelessness that culminated in her taking her own life. However, there are compelling arguments that her demise was accidental. You see, Plato's fiancé, Robert Menchaca, has publicly stated that she was in good spirits leading up to her passing. According to him, they had discussed their future together and even talked about how she planned to regain custody of her son, Tyler. These hopeful conversations seem to contradict the idea of someone planning to end their life. Menchaca also maintained that Plato took medication to manage her physical pain but did not intend to overdose. He strongly believed that her demise was a tragic mistake, the result of misjudging the dosage of her medications rather than a conscious decision to end her life. Further supporting the accidental overdose theory is Plato's well-known struggle with managing prescription medication. Like many who battle addiction, she had been in and out of recovery for years, and it's possible she simply miscalculated the amount of medication she took, especially since the drugs involved were a dangerous combination of muscle relaxants and painkillers. Given her history with substances, such an accidental overdose isn't far-fetched. The debate over whether Plato's demise was intentional or an accident is also fueled by the contradictions in her public statements. Just hours before her demise, she was adamant about turning her life around, telling Stern and his audience that she had never been happier. At the same time, her emotional exhaustion was palpable, and her constant need to defend herself suggested that she was deeply troubled. These mixed signals make it difficult to definitively conclude what her true state of mind was during those final hours. Her son's heartbreaking reaction. Dana Plato's demise hit her son, Tyler Lambert, really hard. He was only 14 when she passed away, and that's an age when you're just starting to figure things out. Losing a parent is always tough, but losing her under such tragic circumstances must have been overwhelming for him. He grew up watching her struggle with addiction and all the chaos that came with being in the spotlight. So, when she died, it wasn't just the loss of his mom, it was the loss of a person he had seen go through so much pain. Tyler and Dana were close, which makes her demise even more heartbreaking. He lost not just a mother, but also a friend and a confidant. It's easy to think that he might have felt a lot of guilt too. Like, what if I could have done something? Those kinds of thoughts can really haunt a person, especially a young kid who is still trying to understand the world around him. As Tyler grew up, he struggled with his own emotional battles. Imagine trying to navigate adulthood with the shadow of your mother's troubled life hanging over you. Friends and family said he had a hard time coping. It's like he was constantly reminded of the pain and turmoil she faced. The pressure must have felt suffocating, being the son of a former child star whose life ended so tragically. Then, just a few days before the 11th anniversary of Dana's demise, Tyler took his own life at only 25 years old. The timing is haunting, almost like he couldn't escape the darkness that had enveloped his mother. It feels like their stories were intertwined in the most tragic way, both of them struggling, both of them feeling trapped by their pain. It's really heartbreaking to think about it. Tyler's demise is like a continuation of Dana's tragic story, showing how the scars of one generation can impact the next. They both became victims of this cycle of despair. Plato's sad last words. Do you know what's really haunting about Dana Plato's story? Just before she went to sleep for the last time, she had a conversation with her fiancé, Robert Menchaca. She told him she wasn't feeling well and that she planned to take something to help her sleep. Can you imagine how chilling that must feel in hindsight? Those ended up being her last words to him, and it's so heartbreaking to think that neither of them had any idea that this would be the final moment they'd share together. It makes you wonder what was going through her mind at that moment. Was she feeling overwhelmed, tired of the struggles she had faced? Or maybe she was just hoping to find some peace for the night. Robert must have been concerned when she said she wasn't feeling well, but it's gut-wrenching to think that they had no clue that this conversation would lead to such a tragic ending. It's so eerie to think about how normal that exchange might have seemed at the time. They probably had no idea that those simple words would carry so much weight later on. It adds this heavy layer to her passing, doesn't it? Just a few words exchanged in a moment of vulnerability that turned out to be the last thread connecting her to the world. You can't help but feel a sense of sadness for both of them, like they were caught in this moment that no one saw coming. The terrifying timeline. The timeline surrounding Dana Plato's death is both heartbreaking and chilling. While her demise was officially ruled an overdose, there are reports indicating that she may have been suffering for several hours before anyone found her. His paints a grim picture of her final moments, one that's difficult to fathom. According to some accounts, she was found unresponsive in her motorhome, parked outside her fiancé's mother's house, suggesting that she had slipped away unnoticed during a time when she was supposed to be finding solace. Doctors who have examined similar cases emphasize the terrifying nature of such scenarios. One forensic pathologist noted, "An overdose doesn't always lead to immediate demise. Sometimes individuals can linger in a state of distress for quite some time, experiencing both physical and mental anguish." This statement highlights how Dana's final hours may have been filled with a mix of despair and pain, compounded by the isolation she felt. It's haunting to think that while the world was moving on, she might have been alone, battling whatever demons were pulling her down. The drugs she took, a cocktail of muscle relaxants and painkillers, would have slowly taken effect, leading to a gradual decline. Imagining Dana in that state, perhaps feeling the effects of the drugs kick in, feeling increasingly drowsy and detached, adds a layer of horror to her passing. Did she try to fight it? Did she realize the severity of her situation as the hours went by? Those are questions that may never be answered, but they linger in the minds of those who remember her.